Keith Smith, Yahoo Sports, covers the NBA, Real GM, Front Office Insider podcast, will join us right now to talk a little bit more. Looks like the Sixers are going to sign Greg Monroe. I would assume this is more – I'll get Keith's take on this. He just got let go by Boston. He was on a 10-day – I would assume this is to get some insight, maybe some intel on the Celtics, right? This is what you do late in the year. You try to get a little intel on your big opponent there, so you bring in a guy like – he can't play anymore, right?
Yeah, he's more or less done as a productive NBA player. He can give you a couple good minutes here and there if you need. I think this is break glass in case of emergency move if Joel Embiid is not right or gets in foul trouble or really something like that. They've got to go very deep. They have to go beyond Boban and maybe Amir Johnson. You want to have another big there to be protected at that spot. But as far as intel from Boston, I mean, these two teams play 4 times a year. They played in the playoffs last season. I don't know how much he's gonna give them unless he's gonna come in and tell them, yeah, that locker room, they all argue and fight all the time, and Kyrie don't like the young guys, and whatever the stories are going to be, who knows? But on the court, I don't. We'll see what he has to offer.
Yeah, I guess in the playoffs, you do have that element of stacking big guys to take fouls for you, right? You just bring a guy out there for a couple of minutes and tell him to go foul somebody 3 times.
Yeah, absolutely. And where things are going for Philly, as far as the playoffs go, they're going to have to get through. Likely, it's looking like maybe the Detroit Pistons, who, as much as Joel Embiid owns Andre Drummond and what takes up a lot of real estate in his head, you still got to play them. You want to have extra guys there. Second round, maybe Marc Gasol, Serge Ibaka. Third round, you're looking Brook Lopez. If Celtics get there, Al Horford. So it's never hurts to have a little extra big man now.
All right, so Monroe going to sign with the Sixers. Not big news there, as we know. We're coming down the stretch here. Sixers play the Hawks tonight. Is this the kind of game where you would anticipate or would like to see Philly kind of get revenge here, or are you resigned to the fact that they are just playing out the string here?
Yeah, they're just playing it out. It's about getting into the playoffs healthy for them. I don't think they're not going to catch Toronto. They've got no worries about being caught by Boston or Indiana from behind. So at this point, it's just about playing out the string, getting everybody healthy, making sure guys are ready to go for what they're hoping will be a big playoff run. So wins, losses at this point, you'd rather win than lose, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I know a lot of fans say, look, you got to be playing your best ball late in the season. You got to have that momentum. But it feels that a lot of teams aren't adhering to that. The way that you watch some of these games, Milwaukee's got summer league rosters out there. Golden State seems to be like, whatever. The Sixers are resting a bunch of guys. It seems like Toronto's doing the same. It seems that a lot of these NBA teams, Keith, are not adhering to the notion that you've got to be playing your best basketball rolling into the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's changed over the last handful of years. I know several coaches that they said that was the old way of thinking, and now they look at it as everyone's going to have a minimum of 2, even 3 days off, maybe 4 if the schedule works right before your first playoff game. That's a rarity. In the regular season, you never get that many days off in a row. So a lot of teams are looking at it and saying it doesn't really matter, how you played in the last week or so. It would if you were a team that was really struggling and you had lost 9 out of 10. You'd like to win those last couple to get the chip righted there. But at this point, it doesn't. I think teams are smartly saying it's more important that we have guys for the next 2 months of basketball than we have guys in a game against the Hawks and win a regular season game that doesn't even matter for seeding purposes.
Which, oddly enough, just to throw this out there, the Sixers have won 7 out of their last 10. I can tell you, Keith, it doesn't feel like that living here. Like, you would think that they have been on an epic slide, but they have won 7 out of 10. That's 3 losses, just happen to be against 3 non-playoff teams, which, I don't know, is it fair for people to be enraged about that?
Yeah, I wouldn't be. Again, it doesn't. They're not playing for anything at this point in the year. They're basically as locked into that 3rd seed as you can be. And people will go back to, well, if they'd won a couple more games, they might even be able to chase Toronto down. But then you have to look, well, if they were a little closer, would Toronto not have rested guys? It's one of those. It's Michael Kay, who covers the Yankees, always says when they blow a double play, it's the fallacy of the predetermined outcome, and you don't know that. That's not anything you know. So I think you want to look at it as far as in there saying hey, what's important? Joel Embiid's healthy. Gets healthy, Jimmy Butler gets healthy, and you're ready to go. That's all that really matters.
Hey, at this stage, Keith, Joel Embiid, when he doesn't play as opposed to when he does play, and when he is playing at his best, where do you rank him next to maybe Giannis and Kawhi and Kyrie as the player on a team that gives the team the most impactful player to be able to if Embiid is playing his best? Is he more impactful than Giannis, Kawhi, Kyrie? Is he in that conversation? I mean, he's obviously in that conversation, but is he the guy that maybe when he's playing his best can get them the furthest?
Yeah, I think so. I think he is. It's funny. I grew up on the NBA where you wanted to win, you needed to have a good, if not a dominating center. It was for me, it was Olajuwons and Robinsons and Ewings and Shaqs of the world. And, when I was a real little guy, it was, Robert Parrish and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and those kind of things. And now you're looking at it as teams just aren't built that way. So almost to have Joel Embiid, that's a huge market inefficiency in a way where that's a weapon no one else can really match. When he's clearly the best center in the NBA at this point with, his combination of offensive and defensive game. It's all about in the playoffs, keeping him on the floor, making sure there's no foul trouble. And if you can do that, you've got something that no one else can really match, and he's going to be able to carry that team a very long way, more so than anybody else on the roster. That's a certainty.
Yeah, I know. Giannis is interesting. He's been to the playoffs before, but would you label the Bucs a veteran playoff team? Like when they get in, they're going to be the number one seed. They've never really played with these expectations before. Is that a roster that you think they can handle playing as the number one seed?
I think they added a couple guys who can help in that, whether it be George Hill and Nikola Mirotic, who have had some playoff moments in the past. They've got Paul Gasol at the end of the bench, who I think is really going to be able to help them to some extent. But as for the rest of the guys, their experiences consists of 1 7-game series last year against the Celtics. Now you'd rather have that than none. But it's not a team I'd look at as saying, they're brimming with playoff confidence and they should feel, great that they've got all this experience. On the flip side, you kind of look at it and say, how much does that matter? Because the Toronto Raptors have had that in spades the last few years, and they keep getting tossed out earlier than anyone expects.
They have won 4 in a row. The Raptors, we know that you just said it. They get knocked out, and a lot of times it's because LeBron has kind of had their number. But now they have Kawhi. Does that give you a different feel about this Toronto team now as as they look like they're going to be the 2 seed and they're getting in? Can you finally say, all right, I've got enough intel on Toronto to finally believe that this is their year?
Yeah, I really do. I think, if I had to pick somebody to win it right now, a week and a half from the playoffs starting to win the East, that is, I would pick Toronto. Milwaukee's injuries worry me, and I think the Raptors have managed this season very well. They've planned everything to be as healthy as they can be headed into the postseason. They're playing great. Their in-season additions have all fit in pretty seamlessly. They've got a lot of depth, good functional depth as well. Not that they've got 10, 11, 12 guys. They've got 8, 9 guys that they know they can count on in a playoff series. And I think they're looking as good as anybody has. And of course, you said it, they don't have to go through LeBron. So that's a huge mental hurdle they don't have to overcome this year.
Then you got Philly in that 3 spot. They've obviously, we just said, they've won 7 out of 10. They got an interesting schedule here coming up with Atlanta on the road, a team they lost to. The Bulls on the road. They lost at Chicago. They play them twice, and they got the Heat in there. And they got that Bucs game tomorrow night. I don't know that the Sixers or the Bucs are going to be handling that game. I'm interested to see how those 2 teams go about it. Do they want to Are they going to put summer league teams out there? They're going to go after each other. I think that one, because last year, if you remember, the Sixers and the Bucs played the final game of the year. The Sixers beat them by about 50. So I feel like this game, both teams tomorrow night probably are just going to say, you know what, you take it or you take it. I don't really care.
Yeah, I think a little bit depends on what happens tonight. If Milwaukee wins, or if Toronto loses tonight, rather, Milwaukee has wrapped everything up. They're going to have won the Eastern Conference. They'll have home court advantage all the way through. to the NBA Finals at least. So at that point, I think what you're looking at there, if you're the Bucs, is now you're really starting to pick and choose the rest of the way. So I think you could see one of those games where both sides are, putting out there maybe not even the B squad. It might be the C or D squad on the floor.
Greg Monroe gets a run. All right, Keith Smith, Yahoo NBA with us. Celtics, they're in the 4. They're still locked with the Pacers. So that is one race that we still have to keep an eye on. And I guess it certainly behooves Boston to get into that 4 spot if they want to keep their name with the other 3 teams. As we all thought this was a 4-team race, but are you putting Boston's name in that race with those other 3?
Yeah, I am. I think that they have shown just how good they can be against really good teams. That tends to be when they elevate their game. Obviously, in the playoffs, you're not facing these teams that you're going to play down to. So I think that's going to really change things. I think Brad Stevens, over the last week or so, he's starting to really condense down the rotation. He's not playing 10, 11 guys anymore. He's finding his 8, 9 guys that he trusts. They're as healthy as they've been all season. They've got a couple guys out tonight, Jaylen Brown and Marcus Morris, but that's more precautionary than any kind of long-term concern. And the big thing is Al Horford is the key to this team. Kyrie Irving's the best player on the team, but Al Horford's the most important player on both ends. And what you're not going to see in the playoffs is there's no more back-to-back games. He's going to be rested for each game, and that's really, really important for Boston, and that allows them to be in there with those other 3 teams in the mix in the East.
5-5 in their last 10 games is Boston. They are deadlocked right now with Indiana, but they won the season series against the Pacers, including a game just about a week ago against Indiana, which was a hard-fought game. But you look at Boston down the stretch. Do you anticipate that they will sneak in and get that home court in that first round, which could be really important the way those two – and they play each other on Friday.
Yeah, so that's going to be really important because the Celtics, they're 2-1 right now. So that series isn't decided yet. They could tie and then go to best conference record and everything else. So we'll see ultimately where it lands out. That game's going to be really important. I think you're going to see both teams go at it. As far as the importance, yeah, you want home court advantage. You do not want to have to go on the road for 3 rounds of the playoffs and try to get to the finals. So for the Celtics, it's really important to have that extra game at home if you need it.
No doubt.
They've been a much better home team than a road team this year. So you know that they definitely want that 4 seed. Horford, specifically spoke to that after the last game, saying, it is really important for us to get that 4 seed.
Do you think that Indiana, if they get home court, would win that series?
I don't think they'd win it. It's always hard to win in the playoffs when you don't have the best player in a series. That's really difficult. If you're going to do that, you better have the best, 2 through 4 players in the series, and that's not going to be where the Pacers are at. It's going to make life difficult because more than I think any team in the East, they know exactly who they are. They know how they're going to run things. They play very, very hard. So I think they're going to make it, they're going to be a pain in the butt to play. I just don't think that they've got enough skill and talent ultimately to win in the playoffs, win, 4 of 7 games against a team that's a lot more talented than they are.
At Keith Smith, NBA, with us here, by the way. So Boston plays Miami, Indy, Orlando, and Washington. 3 teams fighting for playoffs possibilities. Indiana plays Detroit, Boston, Brooklyn, and Atlanta. So both teams have pretty, interesting schedules down the stretch. So Indy, Boston, they play each other Friday night. That's one to keep an eye on because, if Boston ends up getting that 5 seed, they could be a team that could be knocked out in the first round. If they get the 4 seed, they probably win that, move on, and then we'll see what happens. But then the 6, 7, and 8, Keith, are still up for grabs. And I've said yesterday, I don't know that Brooklyn even makes the playoffs at this point. Their schedule coming up is brutal after it looked like they were going to get in all year here. But who are the final 3 teams in your mind?
Yeah, I do think Brooklyn will get in. I think Miami's got a really tough schedule, too, so I think they're going to be the team that ultimately falls out. Charlotte's they're barely hanging in this thing. I think they're just about done for after what was a really rough West Coast trip for them. So I think it'll be Detroit, Brooklyn, and Orlando that ultimately get in. Just Miami can't get healthy. They can't stay healthy. They've had a lot of issues going forward. But I think the Nets, they were a month or so ago, we were thinking, all right, well, this team's going to be the 6th seed. Maybe they could climb up and get frisky towards the 5th seed, and they're going to be a tough first-round opponent. And they've just really fallen off. And I think it's kind of to be expected. They're a very young team, and I think it's one of those things where we look at it and might be starting to see the pressures of being in a playoff race weighing on them pretty heavily.
Yeah, they are currently in the 7th spot. Detroit is in the 6th. The interesting part is every one of those teams lost their last game, so nobody has really changed ground. It almost seems like they're all in the same boat. Orlando's very young. Steve Clifford said the other night, look, we just aren't defending. If we can't defend, we're in trouble. We're not winning games 130, 125, and that's their problem there. They don't bring the defense from night to night. So the 4 teams really fighting for those 3 spots. There's a great story to be had there to see what these matchups look like. But of those 3, who's the best? Detroit, Brooklyn, Miami, Orlando, of those 4?
I think it's probably Detroit. I think they play a little differently. They play the 2 true bigs. They've got a lot of veterans who know what their role is. They've got a good mix of shooting and scoring, and they tend to be a little more consistent than the other 3 do from night to night. So I think they're the best. But it would be a major shock to me if any one of those teams wins a playoff series. I would have to be an injury on the other side or something like that for that to happen.
All right, and then, of course, in the East, other storylines emerge with teams not making the playoffs. Ernie Grunfeld got fired. Can you believe it? He is no longer going to be the GM in Washington. This is unbelievable news, but it looks like Scott Brooks will be back. But the Wizards are a mess.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't like when they make an announcement about we're going to keep the coach before you have the new front office in line, and that's nothing about Scott Brooks. I think he was dealt a really tough hand with a pretty limited roster and then a lot of injuries and those kind of things this season. So that's hard, but it's just never good because you want synergy between your front office and your coaching staff, and now you're not going to have that to start the year, and that makes it a little tough. So that I'm not a big fan of. But yeah, it's a complete disaster. A lot of injuries. They're locked into that John Wall contract, which is absolutely awful. Which is going to be really hard for them to work around over the coming seasons. They're over the cap, and they've only got 4 or 5 guys under contract next season, which is really tough.
So, by the way, before we peek at the West, some big games tonight. I think you tweeted this out earlier, Keith, but you got Indiana-Detroit tonight. Orlando's bought the Knicks. That's a big game for them. You've got Toronto and Brooklyn, big game. Boston and Miami, big game. Charlotte just hanging on. You've got San Antonio, Denver. You've got Utah, Phoenix, which seeding stuff in the West is still up for grabs. You got Portland and Memphis. You got Houston, L.A. There is so much that could change between now and when the season ends next week from today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot can change between now and when we wake up tomorrow morning. It's going to look, different. These games are all, really important. And this is, one of the things that makes there's a lot of talk going around right now that this season's too long and all those things. But this is part of the reason why the NBA, wants this lengthy season. The number one reason is obviously money. Let's not be naive.
Right.
But it's also because you have these playoff races going down to the end. Now, the West is all decided, but as you said, there's a ton of seeding still up for grabs in the West, and that's going to be really, really important because nobody wants to play the Warriors.
Which is a huge deal, though, Keith, because it's a huge deal. I mean, if you're the 7, you're playing Denver, a team with very, very little playoff experience. So the 7 might feel like, hey, we have a shot here as opposed to the 8 playing Golden State. So Oklahoma City and San Antonio are virtually tied right now. They're both 45 and 33. Being the 7 is a huge win for one of those 2 teams. And if you can get yourself out of that 6th spot, if you can get yourself out of the 6th spot and get to 5, you got a Portland team that's all banged up.
Yeah, absolutely. You're looking at it in a lot of different ways. The 7 is, you said it, you're looking at a Denver team that's never made the playoffs before, and you're looking at it and saying, all right, we get a chance there. And then even more importantly, you're not on the same side of the bracket as the Warriors. So you pull off a couple upsets, all of a sudden, hey, we didn't have to meet the Warriors until the Eastern Conference Finals. And, the rest of those teams are so packed together that it's tough to even really call it an upset because they're all, looking pretty similar. You could convince me on any number of teams that, yeah, I can see how they could win a series. I'm with you. I can get there. And that's going to be really, really important as we, come down this last week of the season.
Yeah, big games tonight. A lot of stuff happening. And as we talked about, I think the Sixers are kind of, all right, let's get to the playoffs. I think the Warriors have been there for about a month now. Yeah, sure, there's a lot of teams that kind of know their destiny, but there are a lot of very big and interesting games as we come down the stretch. Don't forget Sixers, Hawks tonight, 97.3. ESPN's coverage begins at 7:30. Tomorrow night they take on the Bucs. We'll have that game at 8 o'clock on 97.3 ESPN. And by the way, we'll leave you with Russell Westbrook, 20, 20, and 20 triple-double, an epic performance by Russell Westbrook. And maybe that can get them out of that 8th spot. Maybe that's the performance they needed to, because they have not been playing well lately.
Yeah, they've been really, really struggling. It's been really rough. That Paul George shoulder seems to be worse than the team has kind of let on. That's going to be kind of troubling to get into the playoffs here. And as we just talked about, they're not in a position to say, you know what, just sit it out over this last week. They've got to try to win these games because you're trying to avoid playing Golden State if you can.
All right, at Keith Smith, NBA, covers the NBA for Yahoo Sports. Real GM, and, of course, the Celtics as well for Celtics blog. And he joins us every Wednesday right here to talk NBA. Next time this week, we will be on the final day of the regular season, getting ready for the playoffs. And those matchups will all be locked in, and we will be probably previewing a bunch of them here with Keith Smith. Thanks, pal.
Absolutely. Thanks.